I think I'll go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Dr. Marc Wenzel comes to us from Shaker, and Shaker is a developer of virtual job tryout, which allows candidates to get a realistic job preview and allows candidates to really demonstrate their abilities to potential employers. Marc comes with 20 years of HR, over 20 years of HR experience with a clinical psychology background, and his career includes internal education, leadership development, organizational development, and of course HR tech. And at Shaker International, Marc is helping to transform the business of pre-employment assessment that engages, that educates, and that evaluates candidates, all with a game-like experience. So we're very happy to have you, Marc. One fun fact about Marc that I know, and I've seen the picture, so I know this is to be true. He has, as a family, rescued a dog, a puppy, a rescue puppy. And in his words, that puppy has become a freakishly large white dog with the proportions of a small horse. So I can show you the picture of his dog. Welcome, Marc. It's very nice to have you.
Good morning again, and Don, that was great. I really enjoyed that. I want to just jump to my panel. Can we just do that? That was such a good interaction. I took a lot of notes, and I'm looking forward to that section with my panel. Feel free to jump in. I've got sort of hopefully stuff that will get the additional sort of thinking juices flowing. So when we get to the panel, there'll be lots to ask. I will move pretty quickly, but I'd love to be interrupted as well. So, as Anna mentioned, we build tests that are fun to take. They're usually at the top of the funnel. We do a lot of very high volume systems. So clients get very concerned about, what's the dropout rate going to be like? Is this really helping us hire people that are high quality? But I love the conversation this morning about, can we blind the organization to certain fields that actually aren't very predictive? Let's get rid of the college name. Let's get rid of GPA. What else should we be blinding? Should we do no-touch hiring? I mean, we have those kind of conversations with our clients. And so we're staffed with about 70% of our firm has a PhD in IO, Industrial Organizational Psychology. And believe it or not, we have attracted those people to Cleveland, Ohio. It's the first brain drain, right? You have to really, because you have to be, it's intense work, all the people analytics work, the predictive modeling. We're looking at, literally billions of data points per year. So you have to sort of intern there for at least 3 or 4 years to get all the systems down. And 45% are women. So I was texting back to the office going, hey, what's our diversity, at least on the gender side, look like? So it's, they're using machine learning tools and data science tools, so it's cool to see at least on that front where we fall. So, this idea of gamifying tests, right? There's been a lot in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times over the last few years where, hey, come play this, this company's using this game to hire their workers. And hey, come play this game and get entertained and get a job. Well, when you actually go do some of those, for example, it might be like a waiter game, and you're running around having to fill orders under time pressure. And somehow that's supposedly scoring all sorts of attributes and characteristics for the job, such as attention to detail and putting things into short-term memory and so forth. But what happens for the candidates that don't get the job? What are they going to think? You made me do something that had no relevance, right? I don't feel right about this. What happens when you have angry candidates who are deselected? You start to raise your risk of being challenged. Same goes for some of the traditional tests, right? An IQ test. Why did you ask me what direction the sun rises in, right? That might be a typical IQ question. 2 trains are leaving New York, one's leaving New York City, the other's leaving Denver. They're headed toward each other at the following speeds. But I'm applying to be in a customer service position in a call center, and that's what you're asking me? It's not job relevant. So we're always looking to make these very job relevant games, virtual job tryouts, so candidates are treated like an informed decision maker in the whole process. And if you don't like what you're doing, maybe this mini apprenticeship is a good indication that you might want to opt out. And that's a good win for everybody. So we do a lot to ensure job relevancy. This other piece about sort of like gratuitous gaming, like let's just throw this into a process that's already time pressured. We don't want to make them do anything extra. We shouldn't have them fill out any extra fields. or blank forms, and yet suddenly it's like we're making them do something like this that doesn't, again, feel necessarily like it's relevant. So we've seen issues where it was traditional test items, but you're waiting, and while you're waiting, you have to run down through city streets and jump over hurdles, and it's sort of a 3-track game that you're deciding which track to run on. And then you wait 30 seconds, and then a personality item pops up. Why am I doing this? It would be like if you're checking out on an e-commerce site, and before you're allowed to check out, hey, go play this game for 5 minutes. Why am I doing this? It's not relevant. So those are some of the design issues. And really on the positive side, again, candidates appreciate having the chance to show what I'm made of. Let me show you my stuff, right? Just treat me fairly, give me a shot at it. So those are some of the gamification issues that we're seeing. So we start looking at this issue of if you do the right thing and engage the candidates, what's happening in this part of the funnel? Who's dropping out? Who's we actually call it opt-out instead of dropout. Dropout sounds sort of passive. What we really want to do from a mindset perspective is shift the thinking about candidates. They're not just passive participants, right? So don't use the term dropout. Let's use the term opt-out. They're making an active decision to terminate this engagement with us. So what have we learned as we looked at, gamification, just to show you what item types might look like. These aren't typical multiple choice items. So you're having, as a supervisor on the left side, pictures are always worth 1,000 words. I should have shown you this instead of just describing gamification. So for a supervisor system, there's schedules. You have to assign your employees to the schedules and make sure you've got the week filled up. So we give very job-relevant tasks to a supervisor, which would be on the left side. That second one would be an example of a picking role or a selector type role in a warehouse, right? You've got the order. You need to get the right product. So you have to demonstrate some attention to detail as you're clicking on the right product and then dragging it down into that box. Multitasking is often a really important competency in those settings because you're moving so fast. Can you do multitasking? We actually measure that quite effectively. There's a distractor task in that upper right-hand corner. That red, tap one red indicator, when that goes off, you have to click it. And we're measuring how long does it take you to recognize that it's turned red. What does it do to your accuracy? If, let's say, it's been red for 4 or 5 seconds, and then you click it and you get agitated and your attention detail starts to drop. So, of course, as psychologists, we're measuring everything behind the scenes, not just the obvious right or wrong answers. And then this third one would be an example of another kind of a stowing job where a product is coming back into your receiving center, and you have to stow it appropriately. So you're taught basic stowing rules. You have to remember those rules. You can show the stocking rules on the upper right, and we're tracking how many times did they have to go back to those rules and look at them again, and then did they apply them appropriately. So it's rules like, things that weigh this amount always have to go in blue boxes. These kind of products can never be next to products in red boxes. So those are the kind of things you have to remember and then apply as you're doing the stowing test. And then when you talk about mechanical aptitude and things like that, we're not trying to do a certification exam. Like they know this, Honeywell XYZ system, and they're certified at a master's level. We're trying to give general mechanical aptitude type exercises. And so we teach you about the dials and the levers and the system. And then you've got some indicators, and then we're looking at, can they understand it? Can they learn it? Can they do appropriate problem solving? So that's how we gamify the job, right? Come play our jobs. Any questions, comments? All right. So some of the questions that we've received on the completion side, people get worried, right? The assessment's going to cause opt-out. So what impacts assessment completion rates? And then when you think about who's leaving, who are these people? Is it good opt-out? Is it bad opt-out? And then ultimately, what are the outcomes of the candidate opt-out behaviors? So these are all empirical questions, and so given 30-some psychologists, we said, let's do a study. So we looked at a sample of 250,000 applicants. These were across 69 different assessment systems deployed with different types of assessments, some that were as short as 30 minutes, others that went, believe it or not, up to 2.5 hours. Across 29 different types of companies with all sizes, from small up to 10,000 or more employees across 14 different industries, public and private. And we looked at the rate of applicants leaving, and then we looked at predictors, right? So does the length of the assessment matter? Are certain characteristics about the job predictive of the likelihood to opt out or stick with the assessment? Are there other parts of the information that's collected on the candidates relevant? Are there other parts of the system that's relevant? And ultimately, are there things around the company that's relevant? What we found, there are things that have no impact on candidate opt-out, and then there are things that do have impact. So the length of the assessment actually had no impact because the vast majority of opt-out occurs in the first 10 minutes. So if somebody says, let's shorten this 30-minute assessment to 20 minutes, it's not going to buy you anything. And yet we get that. Even when we show the data, people will say, okay, great, thank you, shorten it to 20 minutes. Right? Company size does not impact whether the candidate completes it, and job expectations doesn't either. So one of the things that we do, we have a realistic job preview at the beginning. So with videos, with imagery, with narrator voiceovers, we tell the story of the company and the job. And we do it with the emphasis on realistic. So you're going to hear about great fun things. That's marketing kind of related information. But there's certainly the downside of the job, and there's a slide or two or a section or two that really does emphasize the very dark parts of this job and who doesn't succeed here. And a lot of times when we initially share that script back with our client, you can't say that about this job, and actually you can. And candidates appreciate we were talking earlier, it came up in your group, the authenticity and the importance of that. And so even in items, so we'll have some items that represent those kind of scenarios. So for satellite dish installers, we'll show people having to get up into very hot, dirty, sweaty attics with rodent droppings around, right? Because you really want to show the job. And you're going to have some beautiful homes that you walk into, and in your day in the life of the job, you're going into some beautiful homes and dealing with scenarios and troubleshooting there. And then you walk into some homes that are not so beautiful, because that's really what you're going to be facing. They have to see a ladder, because a lot of opt-out actually ends up happening because people are actually afraid of heights, but they apply for the job nevertheless. Or jobs where you have to touch people, like a makeup artist. You know, people drop out because they're uncomfortable touching, but they drop out when? 2 weeks into the job, because they realize they don't want to touch somebody. So how do you simulate these kind of things? And how do you make the opt-out happen earlier in the funnel rather than once they started the job? So let's look at key differences. Position level does make a difference. So lower level jobs, you get more opt-out. That is odd. My ears are going up. So supervisory positions opt out much less than those applying for hourly positions. Pay does make a difference. About 36% difference in it for every $10,000 increase in pay. And then giving candidates a chance to try their hand at the job, whether you're doing kind of live assessment center simulations where you're bringing people in and asking them to engage in parts of the task. If you found electronic ways to simulate it, it's engaging, it's learning, it's showing the candidate what they might be doing. So who are the people who are opting out? This is the big fear, right? We've, I guess I shouldn't use LeBron James as an example, right? We might have just lost the LeBron James of our call centers. Going into dangerous territory here. Where are they weak candidates? Is it exactly who should be opting out that's opting out? So we were able to look at this. So of course, if it's the all-star candidates, how do we keep them in the assessment process? If it's the weak candidates, then well, hey, that's not a real concern. That's exactly what we want happening. So you can see the greens are the people who run all the way to the end of the assessment, make it to the end. The reds would be people who drop out somewhere along the way. And so we were able to go in and actually look at what did they complete, and using that bit of score of what they've completed, what could we project out and how were they comparing to everybody else that completed it. So, any builds here. So poor performers early on in the virtual job tryout had a higher probability, those who had a higher probability of opting out were poor performers. And if they, those who dropped out would have been 77% less likely to be considered. Every study that we looked at, those who opted out would have scored below those who completed. So it's just really fascinating. There's something about the process where candidates start saying to themselves, you know what, this isn't for me, I'm not doing so well here. And so giving that sort of a performance test does help differentiate, and it differentiates on the right factors, not the things that you're concerned about. Yep. Time?
No, yeah, I was just saying.
5-minute warning, thank you. Just waiting. And so, and again, as we looked at it, the opt-outs were clearly less qualified than those who completed it. Those who completed it had 2 times higher quality work, were 17% more productive, 20% fewer errors. And so then the final question was, what happens with opt-out behaviors? So here was a staffing funnel for a very high volume retailer client of ours, literally millions of candidates, although this job family I don't think was quite that high. But these were their kind of main original steps. Right at the top of the funnel, they added a virtual job tryout assessment. And what did we see from just an administrative efficiency impact? So 73% completed it, 27% did not complete it. And then out of those that completed it, we could look at who was strong, moderate, and weak fit. And again, those weak fit individuals, the reds, were not considered. So between those 2 groups, that's the chunk of people who were not considered. The impact is fascinating. So before, we needed 9.4 candidates to get 1 hire. After the assessment, we needed 8.3 at the top of the funnel. Actually, this was the RPO, so the RPO wasn't necessarily that happy to get a lot of efficiencies. Because of the next step, phone screens, it went from 8.5 phone screens needed to get 1 hire down to 2.1 phone screens to get 1 hire. So 75% reduction in the level of effort for the staffing system at this stage. You get to the hire. The hiring manager doing the on-site interview, it went from 3.8 needed to get to 1 hire down to 1.7. It's a huge improvement in manager time spent interviewing. They were able to run their stores instead, and they cut their interviewing time down by half. So just to reiterate, assessment blank is not related to completion rates. Applicants who leave an assessment often represent healthy attrition. What's been cool just across the industry, this isn't just Shaker saying it and looking at our 69 companies that we look at. I mean, this theme keeps emerging over and over again as we talk to others. They're like, you know what, it is, we have to learn to trust this process because we're finding the same thing. And rather than focusing on completion rates, focusing on recruiting a larger number of candidates, a theme that we heard earlier as well. Ensuring a smooth and user-friendly assessment experience. Of course, Kevin's going to be talking to us in a little bit about candidate experience, something that we care passionately about. And using just other tools that are engaging and multi-method sort of, I don't want to just do another form. Get me to do some other things that are engaging and teach me and teach you about who I am. All right. So questions about this piece? How are we doing on time? 20 minutes, right? It's that 5-minute warning that worked perfectly. Yes.
Thanks for this, Mark. I think it's really fascinating to see the psyche behind a lot of this. To me, there seems like there's a lot of online, whether it's gamification or not, online testing companies for tech roles. What are some of the things that us as companies who are looking to possibly get in the space should think about as we're considering the different things that are out there, different vendors that we might use?
Yeah, so great question. The question was basically, there's a lot of vendors in the space. What are some of the key themes that companies need to understand and be thinking about as they start to try to make sense of what do I want to use out here? I'm looking forward to the audience comments on this piece as well. Frankly, from the technical side and having come from this and the way we staff, like 70% of our firm is sort of the engineer types who built this stuff. So one of the interesting things to look at is what is that percentage of sort of sales to the engineers who care about the psychometric side of this, right? The geeks that are usually kept in the back office. A lot of times that gets outsourced. And so you have a large sales and marketing effort with a test that may have been built 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And so some of it's about, and kind of the view is it a shifting process that can adapt as the business needs change, or is it a static experience that sort of, here it is, these are our 200 items, and they are and forever shall be the same ones. Well, whose jobs are the same? You know, look back 2 years. Any of your jobs the same, right? You need to sort of, these are living, breathing systems, and so the selection process needs to shift and keep up to date. So you're constantly gathering data. It's that ongoing test and learn sort of methodology to keep it current with your shifting business. I have psychologists who provide that service as an additional vetting process. It's very hard internally if companies don't have somebody like that to really sort of discern, is this any good or not? Those are at least a couple things that come to mind. Any others from the audience as far as when you try to differentiate what's good out there versus what's going well? How about from Alan or any other comments on that?
I mean, I think it's a real challenge. I think one of the things that I think about is almost like when you say you want to go and buy a test. It's like saying you want to go buy a car, and yet the car there, it depends. You know, you don't really just want a car. You know, what type of car do you want? What does that car have to do? And so not every car is the same. So the same is true in this space, that, you know, it's really buyer beware and know what it is that you're going after, and be educated when you go out and make that decision. And I agree with Mark that that expertise, you know, it's almost like you want a mechanic in some ways, right? It's not just like, what does it look like on the outside, but you really want someone who can help you understand how it really operates, and come in there with some technical savvy. And I think he gave some good ideas about places you can go to help partner with you if you don't have that expertise.
And there are a bunch of stakeholders for each of those processes. So you kind of actually do certainly you want your talent acquisition team there. You want the technical expert who knows about the validation and the other stuff that should be in the technical manual. You probably want your HR and legal compliance folks in there to look at the adverse impact issues. Probably need your brand police in there and get the marketing sort of insight and point of view on it. So there's probably 5 disciplines internally that sometimes we think of, hey, just go buy a test, right? But now all of a sudden we got all these different stakeholders that should weigh in from their respective perspective. Technology, certainly, there's still applicant tracking systems that make it quite challenging, and that we're not optimized for that additional step in the funnel. So now it's an email step instead of an inline delivery. We know there's a huge difference in opt-out rates when you can do it inline, and there's some major ATSs that haven't gotten to that yet. So it's some of those issues too. Again, you need multiple perspectives.
Thank you for showing that. I think gamifying things is awesome. I'm obsessed with collecting Starbucks bonus points, so I totally get it. And my question to you is, some of us on the team have taken unconscious bias testing, class on that, and realized that a lot of diverse candidates tend to opt out of testing. Do you have any stats regarding diverse candidates and if there's a higher percentage of them that opt out?
That is a great question. So it's about what happens with diverse candidates with work sample assessments. And I'll answer that, and while I'm answering, if I could have my panel coming up, so we can then do introductions. So assessments, so we always have to look at adverse impact. Notoriously challenging for diverse candidates are going to be more cognitive ability or problem solving. They almost always have adverse impact. Work style and work sample and scenarios tend to have less. And so what we do with a multi-method approach is we can actually balance that. So we'll put together, let's say, 5 assessment types. We'll administer to a large group a sample that's got diverse candidates or diverse incumbents in it as well. And then we'll go back to the client and say, here are 8 scoring algorithms with different degrees of predictive utility and impact on different groups. Where do you want to set the needle. And then we're looking at, they pick their model, and then we continue to report on that. So it's truly a process. You intentionally say, where is it? Where do we want to be? And does it stay there over time? And certainly work samples and simulations are great tools that tend to minimize some of those concerns that you raised, because it feels fair. You get to do stuff that nobody has to do on the job. All right.
There's a question back here. Now, Mark, just to add on to the variety of testing tools that are being utilized, especially in the technical, like software engineering roles, a couple of our clients are trying them out, but the best success they've had is when the hiring manager themselves gives questions that the platform then uses as input, as opposed to the questions that these platforms are offering generically to different clients. So I just wanted to add, if you're looking for testing tools for technical folks, they're mostly on the front end development, not on some of the hardcore back end type development. And the best input you can give is by a tool that can be customized by the hiring manager, so that you get the questions answered that allow them to screen out people that aren't competent.
And on the tech side, it's been fascinating to watch the shift. I mean, I remember I was in the assessment space in the late 90s, and nobody wanted to screen tech talent on anything, right? They have this certification, good enough, fill the seat. And then you find out, well, they're not a good team player. So right now, I mean, even watching some of the Bay Area companies who historically hired on skills only and now coming out with their own data, saying, you know what, we looked at this ourselves, and it's all these other ththings that actually matter. And so what's the right balance of skill, and can they do the job, will they do the job? Alan Kamen is with Google. He was going to add something, and then we'll do quick self-intro. Okay, go ahead and introduce yourselves quickly, your name, where you work, what your role is.
Sure. So Alan Kamen, I'm with Google. I've been with Google for, I think I mentioned to someone else, about a hot second. So just
But it was a hot second.
It was a hot second. So about 4 months so far. But previous to that, I was with GE for 12 years.
Hi, I'm Kari Bauer. I'm with CKR Interactive. It's a recruitment marketing firm. I actually work with a lot of the groups that are in this room, so you may have heard our name around. And we get brought in to make it, to show off how awesome it is to work at your companies, to help you bring in the talent and your colleagues and the people you want to work with. So we get brought in to make it look awesome, and we figure out what's awesome about what you do and how to, display that. And this is a big part of sort of the next step in that. How do you figure out who they are on the way? So.
And I forgot to ask the rest of the panel to wear their favorite Star Wars outfit. Kari is dressed in a Boba Fett dress because of the movie.
Happy Star Wars Day to you all. Big holiday.
We're actually overdressed, quite frankly. It's not typical for believe it, Facebook. So, anyways, I actually have my change of clothes in the car. So, do I need the mic, or am I okay voice-wise?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, didn't want to be the oddball. Thanks, Mark. So, hi everyone. I'm Billy Henry. I am a diversity program manager at Facebook. I've been with the company for about 2.5 years now. Actually, when I first started with Facebook, I was the candidate experience lead. So very familiar with the recruiting world. I actually was a university recruiting manager for Coca-Cola as well as for Citigroup for many years. So definitely all the college recruiting focus today is definitely right up my alley. So excited to be here.
Great, thank you all for being here. So questions for the panel? I can certainly jump in, but go ahead.
Oh, so earlier, I think you originally mentioned that, at Macy's, there's the diversity from, and this is questions for you, Willie. There's diversity from the workforce planning aspect, and then there's one with industry. And I imagine Facebook has a massive, and as is Google, YouTube, massive diversity effort. So how does the business align with recruiting, and how does it interface with the product? How does that work together?
Yeah, so our diversity strategy focuses on 3 pillars. You have Define, which is all about recruiting. Grow and Keep, which is pretty much the area that I focus on as a program manager for engagement. So I focus on, I didn't share this in my intro, but I basically support retention efforts around our underrepresented people, particularly our Black and Latino employees. And so we have that pillar around Grow and Keep. And we also have our 3rd pillar, which is around innovation. And so we are, I think, still kind of working on embedding, if you will, the innovation part into the actual business strategy and how we really kind of integrate the diversity narrative into how we build our products. But we definitely are very much aligned and focused on how we go out and find talent from a underrepresentation perspective. And so we look at it both at the industry level, which is our experience hiring that we focus on, and then we also look at it at the university level. And basically, our diversity team, we are kind of like the liaison, or if you will, the middleman, if you will, in a sense, where we basically help work with both our university recruiting team as well as our experience hiring teams in regards to helping them frame their diversity recruiting strategy. So we focus on a diversity slate approach, which I'm sure many companies in here do as well. And essentially, we leverage that to help drive our outreach, if you will, to candidates. So focusing on, what schools we're going to go to from underrepresentation perspective, thinking about what conferences we go to, like Grace Hopper, for example. So a lot of things we do are really focused on our team kind of being more influencers as relates to trying to create goals, if you will, for our organization to focus on from achieving higher diversity results across the board. And then from a Grow and Keep perspective, in my space, I focus a lot of my time on building out programs and initiatives to help create a positive experience for our employees. So it's sort of kind of like a continuation of my candidate experience for all people, in a sense, where I've shifted from creating positive, delightful experiences for the candidates. Now I'm actually creating the same thing, but for our employees. And so I think about three things: the onboarding process, because that's an opportunity for your company to shape the experience for individuals who are coming in that are underrepresented. It can be a very scary thing, right? Imposter syndrome is very real. So how do you kind of create programs where you create a sense of belonging when your employees come in, so they feel like they're a part of your organization, your community? So I focus on creating programs for the onboarding experience. We also have heavily invested in professional development. So both internally with our learning and development organization, but also with external partners and going to various conferences and actually sending a number of employees to go and get development. And then finally, community outreach and engagement, because we know that giving back to the community is a big thing, but it also plays back into creating a stronger brand narrative as relates to your commitment, if you will, to the communities that we operate in and that we serve. So we try to tie it all back in a nutshell to our business and really kind of selling them on the importance and the impact that the focus on investing in diversity and inclusion will add to the overall business. And then hopefully in the next year or so, we'll do a better job as it relates to product innovation as well.
Great, thank you. We're done.
For CKR, because you guys do a lot with the marketing and branding, and are you seeing any truncated ways students are opting out earlier in the process or later in the process based on either gender or different demographics of students that can help us know, where we should spend our time and energy and stuff?
Well, the funny thing is, I had actually written that question to ask you later. But honestly, I don't have the specific data around it, but we get that question all the time. So when people are opting out of a process, whether or not it's through, an assessment or whether it's just during you get into Taleo and it's like, oh, they're dropping out. Why are people dropping out? And a lot of people are actually asking, how do we get them back? So how do we make sure we're building in a system where we know who those leads are that might not have finished the application, but how do we go back and connect with them and find out why they're opting out? Because it's for lots of different reasons. We may find out that they're not a good fit, but we may also find out that there's some aspect to the position that they might be a great, candidate for another role in your organization. So we're getting more and more requests to find out how to continue to capture those partial applications, or those they went to apply and then they bounced off, why and how. So there are more tools that we're looking into to try and figure out how to answer those questions for our clients. But it's a big question. Yeah. And I don't know if you have data around it.
Well, no, it's absolutely a big question. We do have some nice blind data back. No, so we did a client, store manager level job, big global client, lots of stores, again, concern around who's opting out somewhere along this process.
Yeah.
We actually designed a very rigorous, sort of surprise, very rigorous kind of questionnaire and follow-up process for the recruiters to pursue, because they were working extremely hard to try to get the attraction piece working right, and then they're dropping out. But they ended up chasing, it was supposed to be a 4-month process where they were going to chase all the people that dropped out, try to engage them, ask a bunch of additional questions. They stopped the process after about 6 weeks, came back and said, you know what, we're good. We don't need to keep this going, because who's opting out? Again, we're in that specific case, the same findings as these larger studies of it was the right candidates dropping out. It's painful to see that, but at least they proved to themselves. So I would definitely encourage any company to create a really good structured process to figure out how to go after that opt-out data or find additional tools like you're talking about, and then verify for yourself. Is it good opt-out? Is it bad opt-out?
Oh.
Alan, did you have, I'm sorry.
Oh, good, Alan.
I was just gonna say, one of the conversations that we used to have was around, we need the best talent. And we need, and I think that this conversation goes to the what ifs and finding the diamond in the rough, and really what you need to find is the right talent. The people who are working through your process, who can do the jobs that you want to have them do. It's not you need to land the absolute best person. And so I think part of this focus on what's happening to people as they're falling out of the funnel is being driven by this obsession over potential false negatives. And I think what we saw in Marc's presentation, which I think we also need to really think about, is many of these people are falling out for good reasons. And so while you might be trying to optimize one part of your process in terms of the throughput, 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road, you might just be setting yourself for more attrition too. So in doing that, you're contributing to churn within the organization.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think, need to focus on simplifying your process, right? Your application process needs to be as simple as possible, only capturing the information you really need to get the signal for the candidate. That was actually shared, I think, a little bit earlier. And I think gamification is a really great way to really kind of provide an alternative way of capturing information for your candidates, but also being able to create a very cool and fun and exciting way to really have a candidate think about your process in a very different perspective. And I think that, you think about your company and what you're really trying to achieve. What's your result you're trying to go after as it relates to attracting talent to your organization? How do you really kind of embed that into your process early on, but making sure you simplify it so that you do not risk or mitigate or impact, the fallout rate to a percentage that's expected on average. You want to try to obviously get as many candidates through your process as possible, without at the same time you want to get as much signal as you can as well. So how can you simplify your process, but also ensure that you use really cool, creative ways to really attract your candidates to your brand, to your organization, and to your opportunities? And gamification is absolutely one of those ways you can do it.
I love the phrase, and you went exactly where I was starting to go after hearing Alan's comments, but that phrase about, what's the minimum amount of information you need to get the signal? And the signal being about who's right for this job.
Right. Yeah.
That's really powerful, because I have this question that's been sort of bubbling up from the comments earlier today and just now is TA as the hider of data. Right? How many of you are actively going out trying to hide irrelevant data and running experiments for your organization? Right? Usually what happens is, we've got space to put 42 ACE questions in our ATS. Let's fill those up, or let the managers fill them up. And we're not either forcing them to hide some of that, or forcing ourselves to get the feedback loop going. And we've been pulled into those scenarios, and 42 ACE questions on the front end of a process. We actually ran the validation study, right? It's a test. I mean, does it predict future sticking with the job or performance on the job? And so we ran that, and that client took it down to 6 items. So 42 to 6, 36 irrelevant items that did nothing to discriminate on the important factors and did everything to discriminate on the irrelevant factors. Because a test and this whole process is still about discriminating, but it's discriminating for job success and on the right factors, not irrelevant factors. Any other thoughts or reactions? I saw a lot of head nodding, but thoughts on that piece?
If I can just build on that, one of the employer customers that we have at College Recruiter did a test on their ATS. They eliminated the resume field for retail sales associates, managers. I mean, not the kind of people that you would expect. It wasn't like Uber drivers, like what the hell do you need a resume for, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these were very traditional. We have to have a resume because how else do we know these people are qualified? So half the candidates got the form with resume, half the candidates got it without resume. The application rate was actually similar, which surprised me. I would have thought it would be a lot higher without. And they hired like twice as many people that didn't have a resume, and those people stayed twice as long. So the quality of hire was far higher if they didn't have a resume. I'm still trying to figure out how that is, but it is. I mean,
Right.
they tested it, they found it, and it then also becomes much easier to apply on a mobile device.
So how long have we been talking about the depth of the resume, right?
Yeah.
And here's an example.
Yeah, they still got the resume, but just not at the front end of the process.
And if I could just add real quick, I don't know if this is your company's product or not, so I hope I'm not sharing anything that's like
No, it's
inappropriate or disrespectful. But like I was using Uber. This was like maybe a year ago, and I was on an Uber ride back to Facebook from the airport, and lo and behold, when I was in the app, I got this gamification that popped up, and it was like, "Hey, do you want to try this coding challenge?" And it was like, wow, this is really awesome, you know. And I'm not technical, but I still gave it a shot. I didn't pass, but it's okay. It was still really cool that it was something that they utilized their product, if you will, to like embed in here a gamification process that was related to trying to get more candidates into their process. Nothing related to jobs or careers. It just was utilizing their product, their service. And so I think, think about your products and your solutions that you have and figure out a way if there are people who are spending time on your websites and your mobile and so forth, there's a way for you to plug in some type of gamification, if you will, into your product or your solution to be able to capture more candidates. Because those individuals who are probably visiting your site are potentially individuals who might have an interest in employment opportunities with your company.
We do something with an insurer. Most people don't grow up thinking they're going to be an insurance agent, right? So that's usually kind of mid to late 30s. You built out a network. You could be an entrepreneur and build out an insurance brokerage, right? So one of the major insurers, it's a day in the life is what it's been renamed to be, a day in the life of an insurance agent for us. And so literally the whole assessment actually sits above the funnel, and it's an invitation to try your hand. And you deal with customers, you deal with prospects, you got to do your day plan. So delegating and prioritizing your time and things like that. You have to do some problem solving. You have to look at sales charts and sales metrics. And you have a chance. You also get at some career driver questions. What are you most motivated by? Is it to make a lot of money? Is it to be challenged every day and stretch yourself? So there's a whole bunch of those values kind of things, and then an open-ended field to just type stuff into the recruiter. The recruiter gets no predictive data. They just get, here's that person's hot buttons. Given these are the top hot buttons, here's how our recruiting team would address that person. I know they want to make a lot of money, so here's what I'm going to lead with. And if the other candidate, I know they want to be in a place where they're going to be stretched every day and learn, a lifelong learner. Here's the bullet points I should use when I'm emailing them. And then I've got the questions that they generated. So no selection, just go try it out. So on the, sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Well, I wanted to go back to a comment that Alan made. I really like that you said that we are obsessed with this, I think you said the diamond in the rough, finding a diamond in the rough or a hidden gem. And I think that's so true. But really, you're right. What we need is to find people who can do their jobs well. And I have a question. Actually, I wonder how many people already in the audience are already using pre-employment assessments in the hiring process. So quite a few. Can anyone or the panel speak to how you can or would be able to fold into that assessment potential, leadership potential, and how does that look?
Yeah, so
Do you know something about leadership potential?
Yeah, so most of GE's pipeline comes through interns. And it raises an interesting question, like what are you hiring for today and what are you hiring for in the future? And actually some of the regulations in the United States are pretty specific in terms of what you can hire for and how you should be doing that. So part of the way we were thinking about it when I was there is what we were really thinking is that the interns come in. We could certainly select them on the things that we think are going to make them productive interns, but that's not really going to provide great long-term success for the company. And so really once they go on to an intern, then most of them will go on to a rotational 2-year program. And then after the 2-year program, there are certain sort of quote destination jobs that they will roll off into. And so because there is sort of this parade, this sort of very structured parade by which people are moving from intern to rotational program to these destination jobs, in a relatively short time frame. What we were thinking is that we could actually begin to think about selecting for the characteristics around that, the program that you roll off, after you roll off into the program into those destination jobs. That may be a little more atypical, but certainly if there are characteristics that are consistent from one job to another job, you can think about how you want to select for those. But predominantly, I think most people, the conventional wisdom is to really focus on selecting for the job that you want people to be doing, and not the next job after that. I would say that by far is the most conventional approach.
Yeah, it's tough to select for jobs that don't exist yet, or maybe defined quite differently in the near future. And so certainly as you get one level up or even two levels up, it starts to feel like at least, the scientists who do this work say, you know what, that's getting too far out there. There's plenty of people who give you an opinion, yeah, this person has potential or not, but getting the data around that is quite challenging.
Yeah, and I think the question of potential is a whole other very complex thing to think about. And what is potential and what's potential, right, really potential for what? Is always a good first question.
Yes.
To add on to Anna's point though, are there certain traits or certain skills that you can look for as early as an intern that would assess them for leadership skills? Because there are things in leadership we all know are very important.
Yeah.
And you can see that quite early in certain people. So that's the one place where I think you could probably find a way to assess, not for that specific job like you're talking about, Alan, which would be quite difficult in a lot of companies, but at least the potential that they're the kind of person you would see accelerating and doing well in your culture and in your company.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there probably are some of those characteristics. I mean, I think you need to be thoughtful about them. But the ability to learn how to learn, self-monitoring skills, I think would be two examples that I might draw on to say those are probably going to be skills that are evergreen as you move up. They might
with ambiguity.
Dealing with ambiguity, yeah.
Can I just add one thing here that has nothing to do with CKR? Sorry, so our CEO is not the CEO. So my background before CKR was in higher education. I worked at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo and UC Santa Cruz. And so we would have huge conversations with the students. I worked in like the student leadership departments and agency, and what leadership means to different early career people is a huge range. So it's really hard to say we're looking for a leadership role in this company, because who says that's even what leadership should look like? Just because that's what it looks like now, matching, this is what we have, how do I find people that can match that same shape, can be actually really counterproductive to creating an environment where you are able to innovate and have different voices in the conversation. So even the discussion around how do you test for leadership assumes that there is a model for leadership. And that's a really hard moving target to address. You want somebody who's gonna be able to step up and lead your team, but that's going to look very different in different teams with different teams based on how they're made up. So it's I would imagine a really hard.
That's why it's so hard to predict. Exactly. Yeah. So I had a question, Kari, for you specifically, given the design background. We're all, sharing different examples of how we try to use design to engage candidates. Do you have any examples of what are some of the issues that people need to think about when they think about designing or using new shiny bells and whistles with the candidate flow, right? Yeah. So what are some of the things that you're thinking about?
Some of them might be relatively, simplistic, but keeping in mind that everybody that's going through the experience is going to finish the experience, come out the other end, either be selected or not selected, or move forward or not move forward, and making sure that you're thinking about what experience you're putting both of those channels through, because the people who aren't selected have just gone through a more intensive, with gamification, you're hitting all those dopamine and you're getting all these chemical responses. That's why it works. People like to play, from babies all the way to my grandparents. This isn't a millennial thing.
Focus on the content as opposed to
Yeah,
just the
exactly.
delivery
Is this the
vehicle.
best delivery vehicle for what you want to say and how you want to say it? Not, we want to do, this cool thing. And then once somebody's experienced it, it's like, oh, this. Now the story's still muck, but I'm wearing a big goggle headset, but it's the content isn't there. The first time it's really cool. I will give you that.
Yes.
Oh, I think you had a question. I had a question too, but I think you had a question.
Yeah, well, actually, you kind of just addressed it. I was kind of just thinking about, specifically in the non-technical recruits and some of the maybe more entry-level type recruits, with the concept of, especially in some of these markets, sort of wanting that immediate result. Like a lot of people, it's highly competitive and, they want to get that job right now. And how do we, I'm curious, I guess, from everybody, like how to gauge that interest to a point where they would go through an entire assessment or a game, especially with some of the reputations of we're not going to hear back, or there was that billboard for a long time, I think on BART, that was like 2% of applications hear responses or something like that. And how do we kind of get around that piece to get that commitment to go through something like this?
Great question.
Is that for anybody?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I think with technical talent, it's different, because
Yeah.
obviously it's highly sought after, but like some of the more entry level, like, how do we get them to commit to?
Just spending the time to do that part of the hiring process.
Yeah, just because time is so, people view it as a very highly valued.
Yeah, so what are those discussions that you've had as you've plugged something else into your application flow, whether it's an assessment or whatever, that you've had around, how are we going to make sure the candidates go through this?
So I think the question is one of, I'll start, applicant flow, right? If you only have 3 people applying for a job and are they willing to tolerate, what are they willing to tolerate? If you have 10,000 people who are willing to apply for a job, then there are certain trade-offs that you're able to make, and the use of these online automatic systems becomes much more viable. But ultimately, how I think asking someone, and it wouldn't even have to be, if you have 3 people, you're not going to put them through you're not going to construct an online assessment process for 3 people, but there still might be an important part of that screening process that's going to be time intensive. And the question is, how do you want to best spend that time to get the information that's reliable and valid about how it's going to allow them to predict their future success? And that could be thinking through the questions that you want to ask them as part of an interview. It might be doing some sort of assessment of their PC capabilities, like can they use Microsoft Office suites and so on. So, but I think being thoughtful about that process is important, and depending on the applicant flow, you have different options.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So just context, I'm a strategic sourcing specialist for Amazon for the warehouse hiring, which is high volume. For applicant traffic is not really an issue, but more it's a question of who are we missing, who are we not capturing because of the time commitment, in addition to who we're already getting.
I mean, that's
I'm just curious. I'm like thinking out loud.
I think it's something broken. I guess I would go with something. Do you spot something that's broken, or are you obsessing about the what if? Like it's almost like this diamond in the rough question again. Who are we not getting in our pipeline that we would otherwise want to have? So I would try to ask that question.
There's that piece about motivation too, right? If we give them something to do and they're kind of self-selecting in to be considered by showing motivation. And do we really want those who aren't willing to at least give us some effort in exchange for a job? We've got one story from a major retailer where we actually had a values fit piece for an hourly job. So that's not always a piece that's in the assessment. And it tends to be more for higher level jobs. But in this case, the vast majority of applicants apply to work in this retail role because it's down the street. They can walk to it. That's the biggest determinant of the likelihood of applying. But yet, when we looked at the values fit, we actually showed that those who fit the mission, and they have a very specific, clearly articulated mission that actually costs them a lot of revenue, this particular retailer does, those who fit that stayed much longer than those who didn't fit it. And yet, the main reason they're applying is because it's within walking distance. So it's really interesting to see some of that fit stuff still fall out, even when that's not the main reason for the job application.
I would just add on, I think, just going back to the simplifying the process. You just have to simplify it as much as possible. I mean, if you're going at the warehouse staff members, maybe you don't need to have a detailed application process where you're asking all this information that doesn't necessarily apply to their everyday skill set. And then I think also too, there's an opportunity outside of the application process, but like with your employment brand story, to really maybe do some promo around that to really just kind of highlight the day in the life. So doing a virtual job trial, for example, or sharing real life testimonials from people who work in warehouses and really having them share their story. Maybe that will be enough to inspire them to go through the entire process because that's what they envision themselves doing.
So we do have a process in place for a warehouse, high volume global process. And it's interesting because it is come play warehouse. Try your hand at the different stations that we put you through. And there's an issue that within that system, there are warehouses that are deluged with the number of applicants, but then geographically, there's other warehouses that are not near large populations of those. So now we want it in certain ones for a screen out measure, but in the other ones we don't. And actually in that case, the client came up with some really cool ideas around, okay, so we've had them try their hand at different parts. They still scored low, so we have to hire everybody in that particular location. So let's put them in the area that we invest the least on training, because they're not likely to show up and stay very long anyways, but we still need them, especially during peak season and the holiday season. And so there's ways to use assessment data, not just to screen out, but to optimize the placement by geography, right? So there's just different ways to kind of, once you have the data, you can do something with it. If you don't know what it looks like, it's much harder. Yes, Faith?
Take one more question.
One more, final, yes.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Any other closing thoughts?
I just want to make one comment because I love the idea of with a system like this with job you sort of have that back and forth as somebody's going through the process. They're seeing how the system is responding to what they're doing. They can sort of get some feedback. Whereas in an old school process, like you fill out the application and you send it off, and the 2% of people hear back. It's a very one-sided experience. And I love the idea of being able to provide candidates that like on a I don't know, like speed dating. Like you sit down, and you're like, this isn't gonna work, and you move on. This isn't gonna work, and you move on. Versus thinking, oh, I'm amazing, that was great, they're gonna call me, and then they ghost. And it's like, it's a very different experience. You can sort of initially assess, like, this isn't gonna work out for us. Like the job isn't right, and the position isn't right, and you go on and go your separate ways. You have that opportunity when you add that sort of back and forth assessment process versus like, I'm gonna be great.
And I would just add that that's possible within every process, right? Like you can automate it and make it beautiful, but within every interaction that you have about a job, you have the opportunity to talk about what's really attractive and what are some of the more challenging parts of that job. And the more we can be realistic about that, the more we're engaging in sort of two-way dialogue about and allowing people to make the best possible decision.
I'll just add on really quickly. I think that gamification is a really amazing thing to definitely think about adding to your process, and maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, that's a little ways off, but the virtual reality will actually make its way into gamification, where you're able to build that empathy in regards to being able to teleport yourself into the actual experience of a person who's doing that job. to be able to get a real, well, not a real, but a virtual feel of what the experience is like. So I'm not sure if you guys are already working on that, but you know, obviously I can connect with our Oculus team and
Get a really virtual experience of the job.
Great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. Great closing comment. Thank you, panel.
So I want to thank Mark and the panel for, that was a great presentation. We did this before for the last panel, but forgot to do it before we let everybody go. Shaker and College Recruiter just wanted to give everybody a little token of appreciation, so it's a gift card for being willing to be part of the panel and making it a successful
thank you so
day.
much.
So thanks, everybody. This was a great interactive session too. And now we're gonna have lunch.